hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya 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 hey ha yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Uki Ebino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pevis agik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ugi Ebino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Ugi Ebino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya yo hey ya hey ha yo hey yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha ya hey ha hey yo hey yo hey yo Fort Beck Community College Uki Ebino yo yo me too gashi dagush kashka yogi piano yo yo wata pebi hagik tabi ichachi ya bino hey yo
How mitakuipi? Yushke wanchian kampichan. Tewa stea yuhana pech yuzapido. Ake Elijah Hopkins demie. Wanawa chinja wakpa. Dechia wakchinja wakpa unspe wankantu dechia taya hipido mitakipi. Hello everyone, and again, welcome to Fort Beck Community College. We are streaming a presentation for a Tahashi, Mr. Jeremy Redigo. We've asked this individual to join us for a presentation and he accepted our invitation. So I want to introduce him in a good way like that. Jeremy is a language warrior as well. He's from Enemy Swim. He's a member of the Sisseton Wapitan Oyate. I believe he's also the current director of the Dakota Language Institute. And it's my understanding that Tahanshi Jeremy has been pretty active with the cultural arts and specifically some of the programming that he does with work with the youth and throughout Indian country has to do with revitalizing, preserving the integrity of certain cultural art forms. And one of those things is bowmaking. And so we've asked him to come and share with us for this 1 hour presentation. We'll just do almost like a lecture style format. And so we want to thank all of the participants that are joining us here on the Zoom webinar. And also we're streaming live on the Facebook page for Fort Pitt Community College. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll do my best to check those. And towards the end of the presentation, feel free to join in on the conversation if you have any specific questions. We have basically an open conversation about the philosophy of traditional bowmaking. And so we'll kind of let the conversation go wherever it wants to go. But Tashi, I kind of give you the floor if you want to do a little further introduction. It's all good. Or if you just want to take off into the presentation.
Tashi, wopera chiche. Misha Jeremy Redigal Makapi, Dakota Matozi Demie, Tokanoa Edwati, Dakota Language Institute Ed Tawani program Kia Wabadake. Petude Toket Kedi Tazi Peke, Gaga Peke, Wowatakite. Mish Monetu Shakon Iched Itazi Pe Wakage. Hinachun Spemi Chiche. So hello, my relatives. Good to be invited to come on here and speak and to share a little bit. Like my Tashi said, I live over here in Sisseton, but I grew up in Montana. I have relatives on Fort Peck and Fort Belknap and Northern Cheyenne reservations there. But I'm enrolled over here in Sisseton. And so 7 years ago, my family and I decided to move back home. And one of the main reasons we made that decision was to learn our language. And so I've been teaching myself and working with our elders for the past 7 years. I started at the Sisseton Wapitan College, and then eventually I took over as program manager for our tribal language program. At the same time I started to learn the language, I also started to learn how to make bow and arrows. And I have a Tahan, my brother-in-law. I call him my brother-in-law because he's married to one of our cousins from over here. But his name is Joe Gallego. He's from Pine Ridge. And so about 6 years ago, they hosted a bow making workshop at the college. They were putting on a lot of these traditional arts workshops that they were funded through the American Indian College Fund. And so I'd always wanted to learn how to make bow and arrows. Growing up, I was always kind of a crafty person. I'd, make different things, learn about different stuff, using your hands. So I always wanted to make a bow and arrow. I always wanted to get into archery, and I actually got to a point where I purchased all this stuff, modern, archery equipment, and then I ended up getting rid of it because I made a decision, I want my foundation to be, made in our traditional Dakota style archery, and not to be influenced by, the modern forms of it. So that's how I started. And I joined that workshop. There's about 20 participants in there. We just used kiln dried ash staves, which aren't really ideal, but I completed a bow. It's about 35 pounds. Perfect weight for learning to practice with, because in our Dakota way, our archery and our shooting style is completely different than modern archery. Anyways, that bow since grew legs and walked off. I don't know who took it, but someone took it. But then since then, I was fortunate to go out to Pine Ridge and stay with Joe for a week, and we made another what they call a south bow. A south bow is when you use one solid piece of wood to make your bow. That's what we call a south bow. And then a sinew back is technically a south bow also, but we usually just refer to them as sinew back because that's when you take the takan, or the sinew from the back strap of the buffalo, elk, whatever it is that you're using, and you use hide glue and you adhere it to the back of the bow, and it strengthens it. It gives it more poundage, and it's just a better shooting bow. So you can make them either way. So then he taught me how to do that and how to put reflex and deflex into the bows. So it made a really, really nice sinew back bow. And then since then, I've made a handful full of bows, but not too many. I actually have more experience teaching people how to make bows. And so I've taught classes at the college. I think I hosted, or I've done 2 semester-long classes, and then I taught a community workshop for the youth, and I had about 10 young people that came in. This was right before COVID hit, and was able to share with them some of our bow making techniques. And just recently I was awarded a fellowship through the First Peoples Fund. And so my project proposal was to host some community workshops for the young people in our community. And I'm gonna select, a handful that went to my previous one that really showed interest and, want to take it further. So I'm going to work with them throughout the next year to kind of help them perfect their bow making skills. And with that, I really believe in like the philosophy behind our Dakota style archery. And I have one of my Mishina Joe Williams at Chubb. He's one of our elders that I work with. And right now he's in hospice. He's not expected to be with us too much longer, but I spent a lot of time with him. He shared a lot of cultural knowledge and a lot of stories with us. And so I always go back to those things, but he would always say, everything is connected, and that's what I believe, is that no matter what we do, and when we talk about our Dakota Wicoh'an, our Dakota Api, our language and our way of life, nowadays we have this term that everybody's using called decolonize. In that process, all of these things are connected. They're all connected. And I believe there's no separation of that. So when we talk about bow making, it's connected to our environment and the land, because those are where we harvest these materials from. It's connected to our language because we talk about these things in our language. It's connected to our creation because there's creation stories that are connected to how these things were given to us. But it's more importantly, it's really connected to our identity as Dakota people. And so when we work with young people, we want to think about that, like reconnecting them with their identity of who they are. They always say, who are we? Who are we as a people? And what's happened to us through the years to disrupt, our understanding of who we are as Dakota people. So working with young people, teaching them about these things, even though this is what we would call like utilitarian, it's a tool, it's something that can be used to provide for yourself as far as food, and it can also be used for protection, to protect yourself or your family, your loved ones. So even though we live in modern times and we have other means to provide and protect for ourselves, I think these are still relevant, and they're relevant because of the things that are connected to it, the stories and the teaching and the symbolism of it. And I know they talk about at one time, I think it was Reginald Lobbin, he was somebody who lived amongst a lot of different tribes back in the early 30s and 40s, even up through his whole life. He went to Standing Rock and Crow Agency, Blackfeet, Northern Cheyenne, and he lived amongst these individuals who were alive during the Buffalo days, if you want to say, pre-reservation. And he learned a lot of stuff, but one of the things he focused on was our archery and our bow making. And so he talked about how in some of these agencies, they would actually have the warriors shoot their arrow for the last time and then set their bow down, representing that they were giving up that hunting and that warrior way of life. And so today, I look at it as the same symbolism of picking that back up, teaching that to our young people, and empowering especially our young men. It's not my place to work with the young girls, so it's the young men teaching them what it is to be a man, to be a provider and a protector. And there's nothing that symbolizes that better than our itazipe. Our itazipe gawahinkpe, our bow and arrow, is the best way to share that knowledge. And so I have that Elder Joe Williams, the one that, he shared with me, he told me a story, and this is an Unkto's story about, that Unkto's father-in-law, he was married, he had a wife, right? And his father-in-law came to him and said, we're going to go hunt buffalo. And so he said, get your things ready, prepare yourself and be ready. And he said that Unkto, he had a bow, but he didn't have no arrows. He didn't have no arrows, but he didn't want to look like a fool and look, unprepared in front of his father-in-law and his brother-in-laws and them. So he went down to the slough and he grabbed himself chakadofru, some reeds, and he fashioned himself some arrows out of there. And then, of course, they went out and they went hunting and they found some buffalo. And then every time he would go to shoot a buffalo, of course, those reeds would just hit the buffalo and they would shatter and break. So there's a moral to that story about always being prepared. And my kushi, she was also one that taught me the language. She also talked about how she said this one time, and it really still sits with me, but she says, it's not my place to talk to a young man about how to be, right? But she says, one thing that I would hear them say is, she says, don't wait until the enemy is invading your camp to start making your arrows. So again, goes back to that idea that we are always prepared, we're always ready. That you're always sitting there ready and prepared for whatever it is that may come your way. And at Hana, we lived in a time of difficulty. We lived in a time where you either, did what you needed to, or you perished, and your relatives also. And today we're so influenced by other things that we become distracted. We become distracted by social media, by phones and iPads and whatever it is, as well as all kinds of other stuff. So when we take young people and you go out and, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to go and search for a straight sapling or, the tree that you're going to use for your bow stave. And the most common is, we say, our ash tree. And that was the most common, and probably, not the best bow wood, but it's just right, and it grows everywhere. And now today it's jeopardized because of the emerald ash borer. It's wiping out a lot of these ashwood stands that we have. But that's, one of the best. And then there's a teaching that goes with that when they would make that bow, that they would keep it upright, so that when you make your bow, that the top of the bow and the bottom of the bow are positioned exactly like how the tree grows. I don't know why, but that's, I guess it makes sense, but that's one of the teachings that they say when they would use a bow stave. And at Hana, they would use, because of the lack of modern tools, they would use saplings or trees that maybe were just a little bigger than saplings. So like in this stave that I'm making, you can see the pith, still inside the center there. So that's in a lot of the museum bows, you can see that in a lot of the bows. So it shows that they use saplings because they were easier to work with. And so after you select your stave, then it comes down to the curing or drying time, which is usually a minimum of 6 months. Sometimes, you can work them, you can form them, but to the actual completion of the bow, the tillering process and all of that would be a minimum of 6 months. Some even say a year. And nowadays they have these technical, like the moisture content in the wood, that is like prime or perfect, so it can be too moist or not enough, so there is like a scale in there nowadays, with the modern tools that we have to be able to test those things. But anyway, so a bow has to be somewhat cured in order for you to use it. And then depending on the type of wood and then the different styles, there's a lot of different variations of bows throughout North America. And same with the shooting styles, they're not all the same. So most of the northern plains are going to be very similar, you know, Dakota, you know, Cheyenne, Cree, Blackfeet, a lot of those are going to be very similar to each other. You go down into the Southwest, it changes, you know, the West Coast, the East Coast, the Inuits, you know, up in Alaska, they had bows, you know, they had cable backing bows, so they were a lot different. But even the shooting styles vary from those places. So I think it's really important to state that the difference between like modern archery and our traditional Dakota archery, and Tanshi Ernesto, when he did his little presentation, I agreed with what he said, that you can't compare those two things, because I've heard people do that. I know our own people that grow up bow hunting or doing archery, right? Modern archery, whatever you want to call it. And then they learn about our traditional Dakota archery and they try to compare those. And it's, you can't do that because they're two completely different things. And then I've learned and I've researched, even with modern archery, the most common that you see today, like in schools, what's being taught there, I think NASP is one of the programs that you see throughout all of the public schools and the 4-H clubs. Just like anything else, those have been colonized. You know, they've taken and they made their archery how they want, whether it's compound bows or recurves. But when you research throughout the world, some of the best archery out there, aside from North America, came from like the Turkish, the Mongolians, different you know, nations over in Asia. And they had really superb bows. Most of them were horn bows. Composite bow is what we call them, and those existed in North America also, even though they were very rare. They would make them out of bighorn sheep bows, horns, and but those were, you know, so even there, when you talk about the Mongolians, the Turkish, all of them, they have their own style of shooting. It's unique. It's different than what you see with, you know, the standard recurve and compound bows that you see today. So I think it's really important to learn the authenticity of all these different types of archery and what they mean. In Japan, their archery is more of it's a martial art. It's more of a spiritual and, you know, kind of looking, you know, into your inner self, you know, and more philosophical, you know, to their archery, as opposed to using it, you know, for sport or, you know, to kill or whatever. You know, it has a different connection to it. So I think it's really cool to kind of look at all of those different perspectives with archery throughout the world. But for us as Dakota people, our style of shooting is different, where these bows, you can't string them up in full draw them. If you do that, you'll break them. And so we have what we would call maybe like instinctive shooting, and it's more rapid fire. And so if you are somebody who shoots recurve bows or compound bows, if you go into to learn about this, you're going to find that these don't have the accuracy range that a recurve bow does. That you may only be able to be accurate up to 15, 20 yards maybe. Whereas recurves, you can go, you know, 50 yards, 30 yards, maybe more. So, but what these bows were designed for was to release the arrows rapidly. So if you were out hunting a buffalo or in battle or whatever the situation was, it wasn't just so much that you had an accurate shot, even though that was part of it, but it was that you could shoot, you know, 4 or 5 arrows in no time. So that if you missed one, you were getting them with the second or third arrow. And they would show how they would carry them, you know, and you would always see these photos where they use their quivers, right? Which of course is Hollywood, you know, of how, you know, they strung it across their back. We don't carry our quivers like that. They would carry them in the front, unless they were like on a horse and going for a long journey. But otherwise they would carry them in the front so they had access to them. But in all honesty, when they were actually going into battle, they would carry multiple arrows in one hand, in their bow hand. And they would have one loaded, and they might have 4 or 5 in this bow hand. And then those were the ones that they were using to just rapidly shoot like that.
And then Tahansh, I also heard that they would even have them in their mouths too. Like they have maybe a couple in their mouth. They could have like a dozen practically just ready for rapid fire.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think that sometimes with the quivers that they could kind of get in your way almost. So when they were actually going into battle or probably riding up on a buffalo, I question if they even carry their quivers on them at that point. Or probably put it somewhere else on their horse or whatever the means was. But so it's really about the rapid fire of those. So I think it's really important to look at that. To me, they're funner to shoot. They're funner to shoot than your modern archery. And then it's, like I said, everything that's connected to it. So you go out and you find that stave, and of course, just like anything, we're going to put tobacco down, we're going to talk to it, and we're going to have that connection with it of what it's going to give us, provide to us, because there's two different stories that I've heard. One was that the Wicoh'an is the one that gave us the bow, and I believe that. I believe that it's connected to the Wicoh'an. There's another story out of Rosebud where this old Wunchi down there said that it was the Shuktoksha, it was the wolf that gave us the bow, but there's a connection there, because that also makes sense that Ahana, our people, our warriors, they would always look to the wolf to get their some kind of medicine or guidance from it, because of what they represented as far as a hunter, their stalking abilities and all of that. So both of those stories kind of make sense as far as the creation and where this comes from. So it's important when you harvest it that you look at it in that sense, and then learning to work with it, because we use choke cherry, we use plum, we used all kinds of different trees that we would use for bow making. But like I said, ash was the most common. So then you're learning how to the knowledge of that, because even the growth rings in there, you're going to have, depending on where, how old the tree is, where the growth rings are at in their growing process, can affect, how accurate or how the quality of your bow is going to be. So it's having that intimate knowledge of being connected with the land, of being able to know and identify the different types of trees, and how to work with them, and then of course, like I said, the curing time and all of that, and then the actual work. And then you think about back then when they didn't have the tools that we have today. So today, like, I know some people are more like where they'll have no problem using modern tools to do this kind of stuff. Others try to keep it more, primitive, if you will. Me, I just encourage for people to get into it, regardless of whether you're using modern tools or trying to be more old school. I do believe, like the first bow that I ever made, I didn't use a shaving horse. I didn't use a draw knife or have anything like that. It was like an axe and a knife and a file, and that was pretty much as modern as it got. But I recommend like with the youth I'm going to work with this summer, their first bow, like that's why I want them to make it, because then you're going to appreciate it more. There's a lot of work that goes into it that people don't think about. And my first semester teaching a class, I think most of my students quit, and then it was funny because I had one female, and she was the one that was the first one to complete and finish her bow out of everybody, But there's a lot of work into it. And so when I taught my youth workshop, it was kind of like they're supposed to bring a parent or an adult with them to help them because of how much work it goes into it. And some of them were just, having a heck of a time, but it was really cool to see that they persevered through it. And you're teaching them that, that work ethic, that we have to get through those things. And then when you're done and you have this thing completed, it's a sense of accomplishment. And then if you are ever to go out and be successful trying to hunt something with it or do anything like that, it's going to have a lot more meaning to you than a bow that you can go to the store and buy. So those are some of I think the connections to it, the teachings that go along with it, to having respect for it, taking care of it. You don't leave them like sitting up in the corner or things like that. You find a way to put it up. I keep mine in the quiver and hung up, so it doesn't jeopardize, the straightness of your bow or, warping or anything like that. And then the bowstrings, they would use a lot of different things. You use the sinew, the same as you use for the backing of it, but you could also use the intestines. I know a favorite was like elk intestines that they would use to make bowstrings. I've yet to do that. I haven't tried it, but I did this past summer make a bowstring out of snapping turtle neck. And that was something that Dakotas and Winnebagos and a lot of the tribes in this area would use the neck of the snapping turtle. And it really, really strong stuff, you know, but it's the same process of using anything else. Let's see. And then the arrows, the wahinkpe, you know, so we have the arrows here. So even our bows are shorter than what your modern bows are. So your average bow is probably going to be about 42 to 48 inches in length. They've been shorter. The longest bows, as far as like Dakota bows, I think the longest would be about 55 inches, you know, and that's probably just short of like going into the range of being a long bow. So it's still in that range of like, you know, having to have the quick release and not full drawing your bow. So a lot of people, like I've met even our own people that make bows today, but they don't necessarily do it the authentic way. You know, they're influenced by modern bow making, you know, with their bows. There's only a handful, Ernesto being one, Joe and Richard Gallego, and Mike Marshall is another one that are, you know, probably do it the authentic or the Dakota way that it was done a long time ago. It's something just like everything that it was interrupted, you know, with being put on reservations and that knowledge. There's still bits and pieces there that's out there, but a lot of it that what's being done today is going back and researching those things and regaining that knowledge, looking at museum pieces and studying how they were made, written materials from, you know, Reginald Laban or other people that back then they monitored and you know, watched the different people making bows, how they shot their bows, and they would write in their diaries or document that stuff. So we look to those things to help us to have a better understanding of it. But orally, you know, handed down through families, there is still some knowledge that I've come across out there, but it's definitely limited, and you have to seek that out and find it. So I know Joe, when he started, you know, he had the elders in his community ask him, you know, because they're doing these things of restoring these rites of passage for young men and young women, and so they asked him to learn how to make a bow, and so he did. He set out on that journey, and you know, I think he's probably going on 15 years now that he's been making them, but he had to put in a lot of work to learn the authentic way of doing it, you know. And like I said, myself, I'm still learning. I have a lot to learn about it. You know, it's definitely an art. And they would say, like, we might think in our minds that like a long time ago that every man knew how to make a bow, but we don't believe that was necessarily so. You had certain individuals that were gifted with that and that, you know, took up that practice. And that even an arrow maker, you know, the man that makes a bow, he might not even be an arrow maker, because those are two completely different processes. So you might have a couple bow makers in the camp, and then you might have others that do the arrows. Arrows, in my opinion, are actually harder. You know, to make one arrow is pretty time consuming. You know, and then to imagine doing it without some kind of modern tools. You know, so with our arrows, since our bows are shorter, so are our arrows. Our arrows are on average about 26, maybe 28 inches in length. And there's different ways of measuring them. I had the first time that I ever heard was from a Blackfeet man, and he said that they would take it from the center of their chest and put their arms straight out. So when I do his method, that comes out to about the tip of the arrowhead with how we measure our arrows. So it seems just a little bit longer. But then I know amongst the Nakota, they talk about how they would go from the base of the arrow, and they would go 6 hand widths up the shaft like that. And then the Lakota, there's 2 different ways. And one of them was they would take it from the end of the elbow up to the tip of their middle finger, and then they would place their middle finger in the center of their palm on their left hand or their other hand. And then that would be the length. that it would come out to be. See, and so these were just like anything that our people made a long time ago. They were determined by the individual, you know, the size of their body, all of that, because then you're going to have more accurate as far as your draw length and things like that. But yeah, so with the arrows, we use choke cherry, we use Juneberry. There's a couple others that you can use. I harvested some plum this last fall that I'm going to try to make what we call ibota, which is the blunted ends, the blunted arrows that they would use for birds, small game, and maybe target practice for a young boy. So I have some plum ones that I'm going to attempt to make out of those. And but do you see there on all of these arrows we have the I don't know if you can see that, but there's a groove that they put down the entire length of the arrow. And see, now there's different, and they do usually about two or three of these grooves all the way down. And there's different speculations of why they did that. And this is found on all plains arrows, regardless of which tribe. I've never seen arrows in a museum from the plains that didn't have that on there. And they would say that that it represents the Wakia, the Wakahari, the lightning, right? Because that's who gave us the bow and arrow. And then others say that it has to do with keeping the shaft of the arrow straight. There's a lot of different reasons why, and I believe in our way of life that there's always like a spiritual explanation for something as well as a logical explanation. I believe that that's that balance in our way of life that is unique to Dakota people. So I believe there probably is, you know, more of a logical or a scientific explanation as well as the symbolism of what it represents because of where it came from. And then also the arrowheads, there's different stories about the arrowheads, see, because now they were made completely out of metal. And so there's actual stories that say that we didn't even make the stone arrowheads. Some say that it was Unktomi that made those arrowheads, and then others talk about there was the Aztec that would, and some would say Chaotina, the little people would, and then others talked about when the Aztecs lived up this way a long time ago, that they were the ones that made these stone arrowheads and they were just left around. And so sometimes our people would pick them up and use them, but that we never made them. And then of course there's other accounts that say, no, we did make them, you know, but we used other things besides just stone before we had metal. We used the turtle claws from the snapping turtle. We used bone to make arrowheads. Then the different points themselves, like I said, the blunted ones, youth bows, they would just sharpen the tip of it. So there's a lot of different ideas of what they used.
I remember visiting with you summer, I believe last spring. I believe you were working on chapa tea. Is that something that was viable? The beaver tooth?
Nope, I had two different sets. One of them was kind of small, and then the one that would have been a nice one to try out. My dog got a hold of the skull and chewed him out, so I wasn't able to. But see, like when they talk about even the turtle claw using that, I didn't know how they did it. I didn't know how they, you know, did they take it off in an attempt to kind of straighten the claw a little bit? Did they attach the claw to it with the sinew? Like, I don't know. I just heard that that's what they use. So it's something that I'm trying to figure out more about. And then, so yeah, the beaver teeth, I believe it was the Mandan that they say used to use those. So same process. Is it something that was attached onto the tip of the shaft like that? Or was there a way that if you had a big enough tooth that you would be able to insert it in there, like putting on a glue-on tip? I don't know. I've never seen, because those things are probably most likely aren't going to survive, right? Like a metal tip on an arrow can survive through time, but when you have natural, aside from rock, right? But when you have things that are made out of more organic material, just like with sinew, they would make arrowheads out of sinew, and they would be pounded down. They're going to disintegrate through time, so you're not going to have specimens like that in museums that you're going to be able to study and kind of relearn how to do some of those things. So they would, when we would harvest the arrow shafts, they would get a whole bundle of them. And see, that's the other part with all of this, is also knowing the appropriate times to do this. Do you harvest these things in the springtime? Do you do it in the winter time, in the fall time? And it can be different for all of them depending on what you're doing. Choke cherry is known for cracking if you harvest it while the sap is running in it. So they would harvest them more likely in the winter time. A little harder to take off the bark and things like that, but it can still be done. When you harvest them, you would get a whole bunch of them, and then you would just fasten them together. And same with the bow, the arrow shafts, you have to let them cure, you have to let them dry. So you'd fasten them all together so that they kind of straighten them the best you can, fasten them, and then hang them up and let them cure for a couple months. When you go to make them, so same with the bows, when we put in deflex or reflex, you're using heat. You're using heat to straighten this out. You can see it's kind of crooked. So, but when you have the finished product, it's because you heat it. You heat it, and you over coals, whatever, you put grease on it to prevent the wood from burning, and you just slowly go and work out any of the kinks in it, and you end up with a straight arrow shaft. And through time, a lot of them they'll kind of get crooked, so you're constantly maintaining and maintaining your bow and your arrows. The arrows, you're always having to go through and check them. The arrowheads aren't put on there really well. And I was told, I think it was Stanley Looking Horse who had told me that when they would put these arrowheads on there, that they weren't on there really solid, because they just use high glue, and high glue isn't like Gorilla Glue or something. It doesn't take much to. Plus, if it gets wet, if high glue gets wet, even from the blood, it's going to cause it to not work, right? So it's going to come undone. So he said that one of the reasons, for one, if it was a war arrow, you're going to battle, the arrow could get stuck inside the enemy, right? But then also when hunting, arrows were so valuable because of the time that it took, that if this was stuck into a buffalo or elk or whatever, especially if they would get stuck in the bone, like if they were stuck in the bone, sometimes you wouldn't even be able to extract it or get it out. So it would, by not having it, fastened, too securely to the end, you could just pull it out, and you would at least be able to retrieve your shaft and just put another arrowhead on it. So that was what I was taught of why they weren't concerned with securing the arrowhead to stay on there. And an interesting thing that I can't talk about it because I don't know that much about it, but it's we find in our culture where they would say Wanwakan, the sacred arrows. And you find that in different tribes and different things connected to that. So to me, it goes back to that, that there's a lot more deeper teaching to these things than what we understand, just as warriors or hunters, that it was much more than that. But yeah, so I believe that by, working with our young people, especially the young boys, you're teaching them their role and their responsibility of who they are. That a long time ago, everybody understood and knew where their place was at. They understood, what their duties were, to provide, to protect, whether it was, just being a young man or, having a wife and children, or being, an uncle and having nephews, or, an Umkana, whatever it was that, we had these roles. And so by being able to reconnect them with these things, we can either, one, take this literal as far as using a bow and arrow for your protection and providing for yourself, or just symbolically that you're giving them these teachings and they're going to apply those into a modern way of education, work, whatever it is. the same idea that they understand who they are and what their responsibility is in our families, and then next in our communities.
Well, and I also think that part of this series of presentation, these common themes that we're trying to interweave into this is mental health, and then especially in a COVID environment, a lot of our community members and our students, they're stuck indoors. Naturally, the winter season going into spring, there's a time of depression. And as we reconnect with our stories, identities, we're able to utilize a culture and language as a source of strength to kind of combat those types of things. And so it's always kind of where our discussions where we want them to go. And while we're doing this in a virtual format, I think it's planting a seed for hopefully our students, some of our community members, to know that there are certain things like this or certain resources within our community, and then even extended into other communities that we can pull together, and that they can use these things for mental health, and then ultimately to connect them their identity, to enhance their role within the community. And what does that look like? And so sometimes we use these terms, decolonizing, but I think it's also important that we that our community members know that this is something that they can do. It's not it's a resource, and we definitely want them to know that it's there, and we'll continue to be doing these things. And so this whole series of workshops or presentations that Tahashi's doing with us, it's all a common theme with experiential learning is where we want it to go to, is that you have some upfront knowledge, but there's also some workshops that we'll be doing later on down the road. We offer some classes here at the college, but also in the future, we're going to be planning some cultural arts 3-4 day workshops. That might be like an actual bow making workshop where we'll have someone like Tahashi Jeremy ready. We'll have them come on site, and then we'll have some staves ready. And so some students could have some experiential learning. What does that look like? And then even later on, as we develop this and we continue to revive Itazipe, in Wahinkpe, we can actually go out and harvest and understand that process from beginning to end. What does that look like? And then continue to share those things. Just from my personal experience, working with bows and arrows, it connects you, like you already talked about, Tahash, with the land, as well. Because before, I was, there's certain trees you would see like, oh yeah, that's choke cherry, that's cottonwood. But to really have a working knowledge of what is an ash tree, now when I go outside and I'm fishing or whatever, I'm like, oh, look at that over there. It's a nice looking bow stave over there. Like a nice piece of ash over there or whatever. So I'm always like scouting out, man, like, and then within the seasons, it kind of connects you to all that stuff. So there was a few questions as I was looking to Hansh here, some of our attendees. How about buffalo for the bowstring? Good question. The buffalo is, obviously is pivotal for many of our tools and resources. But do you have any comments on that, Tahansh, about what it maybe was used for culturally with bow making?
Can you say that again? I didn't hear the part. Buffalo what?
Buffalo for string. But I think maybe that could apply to any part. But
yeah, because they would definitely use the sinew. Buffalo is probably the preferred sinew to use, whether you were making a bowstring or backing a bow. Not necessarily on arrows. I don't think it matters, because you're using sinew on the arrows for putting the fletching and the arrowhead at the tip. So those I use anything. I use deer on those. But if I'm going to sinew back a bow, I probably wouldn't use deer sinew unless it was like a youth bow. And usually youth bows weren't sinew backed. So I would prefer to use buffalo or elk, but definitely buffalo, and then you're getting bigger pieces of sinew off of the buffalo than you are off of any other kind of animal, because there's not very much. It just goes down the back straps, and then of course they have leg sinew and stuff. But yeah, and it would work for the bowstrings also, without a doubt.
Mm-hmm. And then see, there was another comment: rose bush for arrows.
Yes, and I actually just harvested some this fall, and I haven't made any arrows out of them yet. But they're more difficult to find, nice straight ones that are big enough to use. But I found some, and I'm gonna try them out here probably in the next couple of weeks to try to use them.
Would that be like rosehip bush?
Yep.
Yeah, because I've tried harvesting some rosehip and seen some, but a lot of them look pretty. They look straight, but they look pretty lean. So I wasn't sure what the if they were to shrink, they probably have a lot of water. It probably just so you probably have to find some pretty wide rose bushes, I guess. But
yeah, I was down in Lame Deer last fall. We were hunting down there, and I found a few that were pretty nice size. But like I said, it's you have to, when it comes to any of these things, you have to spend a lot of time searching for the right materials to harvest. If you want a good bow, you have to find the good bow stave. And then sometimes, like I think you've experienced, but like the choke cherry, it can look perfectly straight, and you get in there and the wood is all twisted up. So it's all these things are different, and you have to learn those. But yeah, I'm really curious to see how the rose shafts turn out. But yeah, I found some pretty nice sized ones.
That'd be interesting. One bow maker told me staves, any of the woods that you harvest, it's almost like they're like people, in the sense that they have everyone's an individual. Everyone has a different set of like a personality or characteristics, even within the particular type of wood. Some of them have knots right in the middle. Some of them have them on the limbs, and telling you, man, it's like from personal experience, it's like sometimes that's how you learn though. Like one of those life teaching things is taught me patience, but I've spent literally hours whittling away on wood, and then just to have it break on you, or to realize that I should have never harvested that stave, because that knot, no matter how good of a bow maker you are, will never be symmetrical. You'll never make a good limb out of it. And then, like you're saying, Tosh, like with those willows, not talking at you, but like the people that are maybe listening, save yourself some heartache. There is definitely some of those woods like chokecherry and Juneberry, Saskatoon. Make sure that you cap them and you put them up, and you just let them go, even if they're perfectly straight. Because if you get impatient and you start working them while they're even a little green, unforgiving, they'll crack, and man, it hurts, man. Good wood like that, go to waste.
Yeah.
And then another student or attendee said, what about willow?
So they talk about the red dogwood, and I'm not positive, but I believe the stuff that grows down south is different than what grows up north. And so they use it down south. To my understanding, I think it's a different species, or different variant of it anyway. The stuff that grows up here, like what we use for chanshasha, the red willow, you could use that for an arrow. It's not ideal, but you could, like, if you're somebody who harvests chanshasha, say if you want to save harvest the ones that are nice and straight and a little thicker, you could probably use them for either practice arrows or for youth arrows. I don't know. I've never made one. I've never used them. So, but that's what I was told. And so try it out, maybe good to practice on also. But like white willow and stuff, no, I wouldn't, maybe for like a little kid, you could probably, make them some arrows out of that. But other than that, I wouldn't even waste my time with regular willow.
Okay. See any other questions here? Those are pretty much all the questions we have here. I'll check on comment section on Facebook, see if there's any questions. Don't see any yet, but I would recommend any students, any attendees, community members that are on the Zoom call, just put your questions in the chat box. I think there is a Q&A section on the bottom of the Zoom feed here. But Tahanshi, Jeremy, he's a wealth of information. You could probably find him on Facebook. He's also does a lot of sell some products, and so just hit him up on Instagram. He'll Just raised your hand. Let's see. Let's see. Do you have a question, Jordis? You can just put it in the chat box. Okay. Do you have any other recommendations, Tansh, about if someone, let's say, is interested, what do you recommend as far as some basic tools to get started? It sounded like one of the things that I teach a basic introductory class, but not a true bow making class yet. But I think, and you've already touched on it, but is the trying to do things respectfully with the tobacco. And I don't know if there is necessarily a one right way, but just offering some tobacco and then identifying the stave, and then to, just ceremonially, make an offering and start off that way. And then the rest is really a learning curve, man, because I've seen some purists that are like, we got to do it this way, this way. And then really old school. And then other individuals, man, they got all electrical equipment and they just go to town. But I think that's just the journey itself, man, is getting started. If making mistakes, I broke a couple of staves before I even completed my first successful bow, and then everything. My limited experience with bow making is everyone's a little bit different. Even making bow strings this last summer, I got some sinew. I think it was some buffalo and some elk, even some deer. Made my first sinew string that way. But as much as possible, incorporating, one of my goals is to incorporate as much of the traditional aspects as possible. Even, with strings, trying to not utilize contemporary material. Any other questions, comments from our viewers? Because we are about at the end of the hour. I was going to let Nahanshi kind of give an overview for about an hour, and we're already at about 4. So I like that it's connected to health and wellness. We need to make more activities like this in our communities. Hinamia, they said. Yeah, so some attendees showing you some love there, Jeremy. But yeah, that's really what it's all about, is continuing to provide experiential learning opportunities that connect us to our identities. And we have some awesome resources like Jeremy here. So
yeah, I would like to see in the future, for when these things start to become more known and come back, like even horse archery, and start, a long time ago, they would have competitions with those things, just like with anything that we do today, so that's my dream, is to get enough of our young people into it. We see the Indian relay and all of these stuff, let's start incorporating our horse archery into some of those games and competitions, give something for our youth to really get into.
I remember 3-4 years ago, and I think back when you were Mr. Ahek. Mr. Ahek Henichido. But I remember there was in Minnesota one year, I was over there 3-4 years ago, pre-COVID era, and there was an archery competition. That's kind of what piqued some of my interest. I've always liked archery, but there was a category where they made an attempt to do a traditional archery. And then so there was like 2 categories. And then that kind of went away for whatever reason. Different regions host it, but I've always thought that would be cool if they could revive that to a degree where even regionally, a lot of the Plains tribes had this similar approach. If we could, is there any, to your knowledge, Tanshi, any regional workshops or gatherings? I'd heard that there was last October, but
yeah, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of attempt at it. I know, like Chesapa, I believe, at their archery tournament, that they have a primitive category. The one at AHEC, I actually was the one that was bugging them, because I knew some of the people that sat on that, the committee that oversees that competition. And so that's when they had incorporated that. And then we were working with the state of South Dakota, their extension office, to do grants for a camp for archery for all the youth and our, reservation youth in South Dakota. And he was accepted, but then COVID really came into play. And so we had to, do different. That's when I did my youth workshop in my community. And so I think Rosebud does them. And I think Crow Creek did one. Peter Lenke, he's somebody who, I've never seen his bows. I'm not familiar with how he does his bow making, but I know that he has knowledge of our traditional Dakota bow making. And so I know that he hosted a workshop down in Crow Creek, Fort Thompson. So it's slowly happening, but we got a lot more work to do as far as really getting our young people involved, and hopefully it'll grow to a point where we can start having some gatherings and some competitions with each other.
Wow. Well, I think what we'll do is we will conclude today's presentation. I want to say Wopida Tahansh for joining us for this presentation today. Again, we're looking forward to every Tuesday, the next 3 Tuesdays, we're going to be having the same time, the same format, a different topic. Next Tuesday, 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock, we're going to be having I think it's Indigenous Language Acquisition or Land-Based Teachings. I forget the exact topic, but we'll be here again. And Tashi Jeremy will be joining us again. So we want to encourage and welcome everyone to come back, and we'll do it again. So with that, Midakupi Doksta Akewa Chiaka Pikte.
Hey ha ya, hey ha ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ya, ya. Hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya. Hey ha ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Fort Beck Community College, Ukiyepino, yo, me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, piano, yo, wata, pebi, agi, ktabi, ichachi, ya, bino, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ya, yo. Hey ha, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ha. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya, hey ha ya, hey yo, hey yo. Fort Beck Community College, Ukiyepino, yo. Me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, piano, yo. Wata, pebi, agi, ktabi, ichachi, ya, bino. Hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya, hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ya, yo. Hey ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Hey ha ya, hey ha. Hey ha ya, hey ha ya. Hey ha ya, hey yo, hey yo, hey yo. Fort Beck Community College, Ukiyepino, yo. Me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, piano, yo. wata pepe hagik tapi hachia ya bino hey yo hey ha ya hey ya hey ya hey yo hey ha ya hey yo hey ya yo hey yo hey ha ya hey ya hey Fort Peck Community College, Ukiepino, yo, me too, gashi, dagush, kashka, yogi, piano, yo, wata, pepe, agik, tabi, hachia, ya, pino, hey, yo.
Oh, ook staat, Hans.
Oh, stop.